Hi there, my name is Samantha Abrams, and this is Teaching Web Archiving to New and Established Information Professionals. Thank you to the National Library of Luxembourg for hosting us virtually, and to the International Internet Preservation Consortium for organizing this conference, as always. Over the next 15 or so minutes, I'm going to discuss my time as an associate lecturer at the iSchool at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the United States, where I teach 2 web archiving courses, one designed for master's students and one open to continuing education students and those seeking more of a professional development experience. These students are often already working in the field and have been for quite some time and are aiming to learn a new skill or perhaps refresh something that they've already learned. First, a bit about myself. I'm currently the Collections and Partnerships Coordinator at the Center for Research Libraries, an independent consortium of university, college, and research libraries, which supports original research and inspired teaching in the humanities, sciences, and social sciences by preserving and making available to scholars a wealth of rare and uncommon primary source materials from all world regions. We are based in Chicago, Illinois. However, I work remotely from Brooklyn, New York. Before joining the Center for Research Libraries in April, so about 5 weeks ago, I worked for the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation, where I managed 28 thematic web collections on topics ranging from webcomics to vaccination to climate change. Members of the Confederation, just for some context, include Brown University, the University of Chicago, Columbia University, Cornell University, Dartmouth College, Duke University, Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the University of Pennsylvania, Princeton University, Stanford University, and Yale University. I have deep experience in building and maintaining web archives and working closely with selectors and curators. And I began teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2019. This is a little emoji of Bucky Badger, who is the mascot of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I find him very cute and try to include him in everything that I present on about the university. So to prepare for this session, I did some very informal and unacademic research. First, I posted a poll on my own personal Twitter, and I asked friends who went to library school in the United States, did your program offer any sort of web archiving training? 64 people answered, and 65% of those people responded with no. 25% said yes as part of a class, so maybe as a unit or a couple weeks as part of a different class. And 10% said yes, they took a standalone class in web archiving. I also looked at course offerings from the top 10 master's programs in the United States, determined by U.S. News and World Report, so take that if you'd like, and found that only one institution offered a standalone class on web archiving. I will say, however, that there were a handful of digital curation and preservation courses, which likely touch on web archiving in some capacity. I share this information to demonstrate an opportunity and not to shame. You can't teach or learn everything in graduate school, and often specific skills-based training takes place beyond the classroom. I'm also aware that some courses are probably not available on the standard course page, and so it's possible that I may have missed something. That said, if master's programs were routinely offering semester-long or shortened formal instruction in web archiving, what would the class look like? What would it cover? What would it leave out? How might you pack everything you need to know into a single course? You wouldn't, but let's pretend. So when I was a student at Madison, a master's student, I actually took a week-long summer course on web and social media archiving. That week we met every day for 4 hours a day and worked individually from the command line on our own computers. I learned a lot about the inner workings of web archives and worked really hard to turn those skills into more web archiving work. About 2 years into my career as a web archivist, I started thinking really hard about training. I was already involved with the International Internet Preservation Consortium's training working group, which I think you will hear from today. And my inbox, my personal and work inbox, frequently filled with questions from working professionals about Archivit, collection development, permission requests, and more. Everybody was really curious about what Ivy Plus was doing. Could they see our permission letter? Could I talk to them about how we use Archivit? Things like that. So after some thinking and planning, I drew up a rough syllabus and I pitched a course titled Introduction to Web Archiving at Madison, where it was first offered through continuing education and later through the school's master's program as LIS 640. And that is a topic class on anything from social media use to web archiving and to management. And though the master's course is only available to in-person and online students at Wisconsin, the continuing education course is available to all. In the 3 years that I've been teaching the course, I've had students from Hong Kong, Dubai, London, Canada, and more. Both courses are really short, so the continuing education version of the course is 6 weeks long and the master's version is 5. And because we're on such a short timeline, it's imperative for me that students know exactly what they're getting from the course. I can't cover everything. So for instance, we touch very little on how to properly and technically capture something like Facebook. But I therefore make it my goal for students to leave the course with a solid enough foundation and with the confidence for them to continue their learning independently. Each week we cover something different. So week 1 is focused on terminology and basic concepts. Week 2 we cover and I have students write their own collection policies. Week 3 is a really deep dive into quality assurance where I have students work through 10 websites that they have crawled and look for errors. It's always a lot of confusing fun, I guess. Week 4 is dedicated to metadata and access. Week 5, we focus on additional tools, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And in week 6, we kind of wrap everything up and reflect on what we've learned. We also do very little high-tech command line work. Because the course is offered exclusively online, it's really hard for me to offer tech support at a distance. We use tools that come working mostly out of the box, like Archivit, Conifer, and PermaCC, though I'm of course happy to help anyone that's interested in more advanced tools. So from the continuing education perspective, my most common student is the typical lone arranger, lone archivist at a university who has been asked to start web archiving kind of suddenly and has been given access to an Archivit account. As an aside, I saw this a lot last semester and the semester before. In the middle of a pandemic, an institutional administrator has said, we need to be documenting our response to COVID. That response is entirely online. That's how institutions are communicating policy changes. And the student has absolutely no idea what to do. So they're kind of, deep end, no floaties. And though lone arrangers are really common, I also teach students who are studying to work in museums. I teach corporate archivists, current students at other institutions. I've had a few journalists actually take my course, which is really encouraging, and a lot of public librarians. So it's a good reminder that web archiving isn't just happening at universities, it's happening everywhere. People really want to learn this valuable skill. It's also a good way for me to make the focus really about the practice of web archiving and not necessarily the practice of web archiving at a university. After 6 weeks, my main priorities are that students understand how to run crawls in the tool of their choice, that they understand how to check crawled websites for errors and inconsistencies, and that they can provide basic access to what they've collected. Digging deeper, we also discuss the importance of appraisal and how to best advocate for their own web archiving program and needs. And make sure that each student leaves the course able to ask for the resources that they need to be successful and articulate exactly why they need them. I also encourage students to forge relationships with each other and ask questions of each other, and to get involved with organizations doing really thoughtful work like Documenting the Now, Project Stand, and the International Internet Preservation Consortium. I also encourage them to check out the Web Archiving Roundtable through the Society of American Archivists. Web archiving, at the end of the day, it's really hard, and I like to make sure that students know that they're not going at this alone. Introducing them to other perspectives as well is a really good reminder that I'm not the only expert. There are all kinds of ways to engage with web archiving, and I'm sharing a sliver of a perspective with them in my course. Overall feedback on the course has been really positive, or on the courses has been really positive, and it's something that I wasn't totally expecting right away, only because I'm a new teacher, and after completing my degree in person, teaching online, it takes some getting used to. Regardless, and more than anything else, students have really appreciated the opportunity to experiment with hands-on tools like Archivit, Conifer, and PermaCC. Having access to Archivit in particular in the classroom has been a real advantage. While it's far and away the most widely utilized tool for web archiving in the United States, which is precisely why we use it in class, It can be expensive for a lot of institutions, and professionals often don't have, a sandbox to play in and experiment with the ins and outs before getting started. But in a more structured classroom setting, students can poke around, run test crawls, make mistakes, and bounce ideas off each other, which I hope, enables more fluid and experimental learning. Students also appreciate having something really tangible in their hands as they leave the course, like their collections that we can make public in Archivit, or perhaps a link to their Conifer page. To be able to hand an administrator or coworker something to demonstrate what they've learned and help others visualize the possibilities of web archiving is really helpful. It's also important when students have to demonstrate need for funding or support for their institutional administration. That said, the structure and timeline of the course doesn't always allow for a true deep dive into any tool. We spend 4 weeks working in Archivit, 1 week working in other tools, as I mentioned above, and focusing heavily on these out-of-the-box tools means that we spend close to zero time working with other tools like Twerk, Social Feed Manager, and others, which might be better suited for some institutions, especially those who are looking to collect social media. In fact, though I encourage students to crawl social media seeds in Archivit and Conifer, we spend very little time talking about the intricacies that come alongside properly collecting Twitter or Facebook, which is a desperate need for most institutions engaged in web archiving. I found that students are also really interested in discussing the intricacies of permission and notification. And while I'd love to have students send an email notification to a site owner, 6 weeks doesn't always allow or grant us the luxury of waiting for the site owner to respond before continuing with our work. It is, in my view, one thing to read and learn about the ethics of web archiving, and another to enact and ideate various policies. Students do a great job engaging with collecting questions about social media and other sites, but until they're able to put some of that, into real-life action, it's really difficult to know how their opinions and instincts might change after some, timely feedback. Though perhaps that's true of all classroom settings. Now, would expanding the course from 6 weeks to, say, 14 solve these problems? Probably not, which is why I'm so grateful for additional training opportunities like the materials created by the Training Working Group and others. It's my hope at the end of the day that providing my students with a foundation and the ability to talk about web archiving and the knowledge of where to look next will enable and encourage them to view web archiving as a practice that requires continual engagement and learning. It's not a mountain that you have to scale. It's more like a desert or a prairie that you're trying to get across, and there's not really an end, which is good, because I think continual engagement is the most beneficial thing that I can leave students with. So I really appreciate you listening. I know this is a really fast look at what I do for my students, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions. I'd also love to just connect with you one-on-one if you're teaching web archiving. I know you're out there. I'd love to hear your strategies, what you found successful, what you've struggled with. I'd also be really happy to, and I am happy to share my syllabi and my resources. They are all available on the web, and I've put all the links into the Wayback Machine, so we still have access to everything. But I'm aware that not everyone can afford a course, and so if you know of anyone who wants the resources, I'm happy to pass them along and share them. I occasionally do share them on my social media account, but I'm always happy to email them to you and make them available otherwise. So thanks so much for listening, and again, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you in a bit.